This episode is truly special, and I genuinely mean it. We're going to talk about mental health. I invited a guest who has been in the industry for more than 3 decades. I had so many questions I was looking for answers for, and I'm glad that we were able to sit down, lose track of time, and just dive into the conversation because true, genuine stories sharing genuine stories matters more than ever in the world of AI. All the conversations I had with entrepreneurs, directors, executives, and even people outside of the C suite level, they all dealt with some sort of mental struggles, mental health issues that they had to overcome, had to figure out somehow. So conversations matter. And without any further ado, let's jump right into the conversation. I hope you'll enjoy it. Hello, everyone. I am here with Dr. Elaine Rotenberg, and today we're going to talk about mental health. And I believe that this is the most important topic we should all care about, and we should all spend some time thinking about and being around people like Dr. Elaine Rotenberg that has been around in that industry for more than 3 decades, if I recall correctly. So there's
You are right.
no better person to talk about this than to you, Elaine. If you could introduce yourself and the nonprofit organizations you represent.
Sure. Yes. Of course, I started when I was 12. Let's just go with that. I'm just kidding, Matt. Thank you. Thanks for having me. So it's Dr. Elaine Rotenberg. I'm the Chief Clinical and Impact Officer at Alpert Jewish Family Service and Levin Jewish Residential Service, based in West Palm Beach, Florida, which is quite close to Palm Beach. And I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. My background is I got an undergraduate degree at Brandeis 100 years ago. And then I went to University of Denver for graduate school in developmental psychology and clinical psychology. And I interned at Yale in the psychiatry department. And, then I made a choice at some point early on in my career that I really wanted to be engaged with community, and I love to teach as well. So I landed here in a community organization where I kind of get to do everything I wanted to do as a grown-up in helping people's lives.
Wow. So it sounds like it was your calling almost, if you will. How did it start? I mean,
When I think about, it's interesting when I think about getting into clinical psychology and mental health in general. I think it all stems from education. My dad used to tell me when I was in college, he would say to me, make sure you get your teaching certificate. It's always good to be able to, and I love to be in front of a classroom and teaching. And so between that and communication, and there was not a seminal issue that made me think about like, oh my God, I have to go into clinical psychology. Because what's interesting, and maybe this connects to it, Matt, I don't know, is that when I was in school, in graduate school, what I studied was, even though I was going to clinical psychology, I studied developmental psychology. And so what that means is really looking at how human beings develop, how we start from being, a little brain and then always growing up into becoming what we're going to become and what happens along the way. And I realized that somewhere early on that it's way important to understand what it looks like when things go right and what's supposed to happen and before you just go in and try to like fix somebody or label somebody. Like we really need to understand what happens during life transitions for all of us. And then it's easier afterwards if something's going wrong in somebody's life to come at it from that angle. So I guess I always had sort of a more humanistic, being able to connect with human beings, which is funny because it started that way years ago for me. And obviously you make it sound like, which is true, 3 decades or more in this industry. Well, 4 probably in this industry. And I think more than ever, what people really want now is the very same things that I started off wanting to do, which was just connect with people, help people be heard.
genuine human stories matter more than ever, I feel like, in the world of AI. The AI, but I told you that I'm going to lead with my curiosity. And there it is. I'm specializing in the development of brain and how we start with a little brain and to develop into bigger brain. So I can imagine my next question is, because it's very timely for me, how does one, or as a parent, what kind of environment do you have to create to make sure that the brain develops? I don't know if this is a proper way to word it properly, correctly, like without those mental disorders or without essentially in a calm way, maybe without anxiety, without
So let's back up. Let me help you. Let's back up a little bit, because what you're asking is you're asking like a 3-day seminar question. It's a huge it's a huge thing that we're talking about. I mean, on a very basic level, if we're going to talk about AI for a second, one of the things, at least at this point, that AI is not able to do is to replace an interpersonal, emotional, empathic relationship. And at this point, the careers that should be least worried about being replaced are ones that really involve a genuine human to human conversation and connection and reaction. In fact, people are talking about the fact that, there's a lot of questions in my industry about, like, are we just going to talk to ChatGPT? Are we going to have a bot answer our mental health questions? What is mental health? What are we going to do? How do we talk to our kids? All the things you're asking. So looking at what's happened and how fast things are happening, and I know you're a parent, and I want to answer your question. The human brain, the kid's brain is like developing till 26 years old. It's really interesting. People are saying that, which is why a lot of the issues about exposure to internet, exposure to things that are hard to comprehend it's a tough time to raise a kid. I was at a seminar recently where the presenter said to a room of psychologists, tell your patients, if you are somebody that is prone to worry and anxiety, this is the generation for you. Because the reality is we're more anxious, more stressed, more depressed than at any time, at any time. And I know you have a million questions to ask me. I could just keep talking, but
it's great. And by the way, to what you just said, that it's the best time for psychologists and people in that area, experts in that area. Because I read somewhere that 60% of psychologists don't have at least spots for new patients for like less than 4 or 5 months. Like something crazy. Like there's a shortage of experts in that.
There is. And you have to be careful because there's a shortage of experts, but at the same time, there's an increase in things popping up that you don't even know who you're talking to, right? You can, talk to a robot about your mental health needs and not even know what response you're getting. People are less concerned about, you say talking to an expert, Where to begin, Matt? The place to begin is that we have ourselves in terms of mental health. We all have to identify the things in our world that we can genuinely be in control of. And when we deal with all those reactions you talk about, like anxiety and depression and all those things, that's usually an indication that there's something in our world that we are not managing. And because things are moving so fast right now on so many levels, I get really, really genuinely concerned that we are not allowing space for people to have this conversation, for us to talk, for me to say to you, how are you doing today, Matt? And to really genuinely hear the answer, and it's a big concern, and it's a big concern for the next generation as well, having come out of the pandemic, and that's a whole other topic.
I was about to say the pandemic, the post-pandemic world, the influx of AI applications everywhere, and social media obviously still, I would say, in early development because it's been maybe 1 or 2 decades, maybe I would say even 1 decade since like the Instagram comparison. I like to call the platform that allows you to compare yourself with all of those perfect human beings out there,
Right.
whatever.
Matt, it's worrisome to me, and I'll tell you why it's worrisome to me and for the next generation, because people today don't necessarily, if we stick on social media for a second, they don't really know sometimes now even who they're talking to. You don't know. It's very funny. I never knew what the word bot was. I never knew that bot was short for robot. Like I had no idea. It's just a bot. And I didn't know that. And I don't know that everybody knows that.
I had no idea.
Okay. You just thought a bot was a thing, right? A bot is, okay. Now see, I taught you something. So a bot is a robot. Okay. And what happens now is, think about this. Okay. Let's maybe let this part of the conversation talk a little bit about pandemic and bots and all that stuff if we can, because I know we could go all over the place and I want to give your audience something helpful. So in the time that we have, our whole world, and let's just talk about our own humanness, our own self, completely shifted because of the pandemic. Right now, it's almost like there's just two time periods now. There's before pandemic and after pandemic, or BC and AC. Okay. Sometimes people don't even know what year we're in anymore. I ask people what year, 25, are we in 26, 24? Who knows? It doesn't matter. We're in the post-COVID years. And what does that even mean? So the magnitude of what happened in that 2-year period of time, we need to talk about it. We need to understand it. And I'm going to tell you some things that happened, okay? The first thing that happened is that in a second, the rug was pulled out from under us, and we lost any familiar sense of time, of boundaries, of relationships. Anything that was familiar to us disappeared. We all became unsafe and afraid that we were going to die, and there was no cure. So imagine, and we can imagine it now, but this was us and we lived through it. So if I just tell you the COVID story, okay, imagine this story, but it was you. Imagine that one day you wake up and you learned that you can't go to Starbucks, you can't go to the gym, you can't work out, you can't leave your house without putting a mask on. You have to wash your groceries before they come into the house. And oh yeah, you can't even go to the grocery store. You can no longer visit your old relatives who are living in nursing home. You can't do that anymore. Your children, effective immediately, cannot go to school and they cannot play with their friends. Now, if I tell you this story about somebody else, you would go, oh my God, how are they going to manage that? Okay. That was us. And here's the other thing about that time. Okay. We were not all in the same boat. And that is probably the biggest, what's the word? I think that the worst thing that happened during COVID is we behaved as if we were all experiencing COVID. We were all in the same boat. And we were not. We were all experiencing the same storm, but we were in very different boats. Somebody was in a boat that had 3 little kids at home. I don't know how old your children are.
My daughter's 6 months, so it was
So you didn't have a child during COVID. Okay. So you could have been, imagine a parent who their boat during COVID is a new mom with an infant at home. Okay. Another boat is somebody who is going through chemotherapy, but who now can't go because without a mask, and it's not even safe to go into the hospital. And if she does, she can't go with anybody else and has to go for her cancer treatments by herself. Somebody else's boat was a boat that consisted of going through a divorce. Somebody else's boat was a boat in which they had aging parents. Somebody else's boat was going to lose a job, going to get through. People after COVID, Matt, I created this presentation and I talked all around the country about this, which was charting our new reality. And the issue with that was it's like the whole backdrop changed and nobody gave us the game plan. And so we all had to figure out how to navigate the new storm, even though we had our own boat we were in. And so when I talk to people, I say, remember 2020 when COVID happened? And everybody raises their hand. Now I say to somebody, can you tell me before 2020, did any of you have anything in life that you were dealing with? How about the day before the world shut down? Did you have anything you were dealing with in your life? Well, of course we did. COVID didn't make that stuff go away. It just added a layer of worry and fear and franticness. And to a degree, we have not lost that. And so then you add that. And then on top of that, then we go into our political climate. You remember that? Remember the political climate? Okay, that was a little nuts, right? Right? Okay. Everything on top. Remember the divisiveness of our country? Okay. And you're still in your boat trying to navigate your own world. And everybody's experience during that time mattered. And we all deserved, and we will never get it, the opportunity. If I sat in a room, which I've done before with like 10 or 20 people and said, okay, I'm going to go around the room. All I'm going to do today, I'm not going to talk to you about anything. I want you each to have 5 minutes to tell me what your experience was like in terms of what you lost or what you gained during COVID. And we've all had to bottle that up because our world has gone on. Okay. So that's just a reality check. Now, does that mean that we're all doomed to decompensate and be mentally ill and things like that? Of course not. But what it means is that we all have a responsibility for ourselves and our families to figure out what it means to be resilient and to cope. And every single human being has the ability to cope. Everybody does. And the other thing that maybe I will share, which I don't know how we got on this. I don't know if this is helpful or not to you, but there's a center in Israel called the Israel Trauma Center. And one of their psychologists developed this model called the basic pH, BASIC pH, which means that the theory says that we all have these 6 pots, BASIC pH, these 6 pots of coping, 6 buckets, if you will. B is our belief, A is our attitudes and our affect, which is our emotions. S is our socialization, how we connect with other people. C is our creativity or cognitive abilities, things like that. I is imagination, and C, creativity, and pH is our physicality. And at any time we can use any of these pots, we all have the ability to cope. We've all had to go through something tough in our life, but we don't usually stop and say, how the heck did I deal with that? We've all had that time in our life where we've said, oh my God, I'm never going to make it through this. But we did because we're here now. So how did we do it? And if we ask ourselves that question, we'll get a little inkling into who we are and how we manage. Is it by talking to other people? Is it by playing puzzles? Is it by jogging? Is it by driving to a mountaintop and meditating? What is it that's unique to us that helps us cope? And we need to take the time to figure that out, because that's the only way we're going to be able to manage in our space right now.
Yeah. And I like how you said that we've all lost something, we've all gained something during that time. We all did. And I also agree that for me, it was the way to find mindfulness a little bit during that time, at least, was to understand what's in my control, what's not in my control. That was biggest thought about those different boats. Almost like reminded me of like perspective on your trying to have a third person perspective on your life, and not to compare your boat to someone else's boat, but just to see that we've all dealing with our boat. We have to do to the best of our capability, and we have to go through it somehow. Amor fati, love your fate, and go through it.
And the other piece of that, though, Matt, which is really critical, is to respect the fact that everybody else has a different boat than you, and everybody has the right to have that boat. And so there's that whole thing. And then, that's sort of the more esoteric, like really more philosophical understanding of the big picture. And really our humanity is what guides us and helps us through anything anyhow, really. But if you want to get down to the mental health piece of it, in terms of, we talk about mental health, we can't forget the fact that there are people that are really suffering, and there are people that are suffering with mental illness. And that, one of the biggest things that I've seen over the course of my career that I'm proud of most, I think, in terms of the work I've brought to my agency, is to bust through myths, that that we should feel stigmatized if there's a mental illness. We should feel stigmatized and not talk about the fact that, somebody's struggling with addiction. Over the years, when I started off in the field, if somebody called asking for help and they were struggling with addiction, we would send them away and tell them to get clean for 6 months, and then you could come back and deal with your problems. Because mental illness and addiction lived in 2 completely different planets. And now, all these years later, we know that, like, the co-occurrence is more than 50% of those with addiction that have a mental illness, and, vice versa. There's a lot of that too. And so that's where we have to educate ourselves as community. That's where things like mental health first aid come in, which is, I don't know if you have time to talk about that or not, but there's so many things we could talk about.
Now, there's so many directions that I wanted to take it.
Go, you do. You take it any place you want.
One of the direction I wanted to take it, and I know this could be another seminar of yours, and maybe 3-day seminar, was to deal with inner shadows. I feel like this is something that
To deal with what?
Inner shadows.
Inner shadows?
That's a thing that is, I hear from everyone I'm speaking with, and even outside of the podcast and the conversation I'm having here in life as well. Like those how does one go from your reflections, your thoughts, to how they impact your feelings to actually have an outcome that you desire, which is being in a more mindful state instead of being constantly dealing with anxiety, with stress that obviously, I guess we can say it kills us. I mean, just stress, and then we're we can't underestimate how important it is and how impactful it is on so many lives. So how does one, what can you tell me about that? Like, maybe
I can tell you a lot about that.
we can do a lot about that. So let's just take it from here.
Okay, I'll try to make it. We'll carve down the 3-day seminar. Okay, here it is. Here's the takeaway. It's not the trigger, it's the response. So what I mean by that is we walk around, I'm so stressed, I'm so stressed, I'm so stressed, I'm so stressed. Stress is not something that we are. Stress is something that we all have. Stress is, it's not even, it's what we're talking about is a world filled with stressors, things that are our response, our physiologic response is what stress is. And stress, the stress reaction, we all have, and it's normal and it's healthy. And thank God we have it. Our stress reaction is our internal, not shadow, but our internal warning system to tell us if we have to, work harder or get ready for something or prepare extra hard or run away from something that we need to, prepare for. Our stress reaction is when we perceive that something is beyond our ability to manage. So does that always mean a bad thing? No. If you're planning a big wedding, okay? Or if you are going to talk to your boss and ask your boss for a raise, any of these things, because what happens is, let me see if I can make this pretty concrete for us. Our body knows how to react in those situations without even thinking. When we know that we're putting that invitation list together for the wedding, we get the stress reaction, which is your heart races and you start constricting your muscles, and you find sometimes you're panicky, and you get sometimes people like whatever your way of experiencing that stress reaction in your body is. That's what happens when we perceive as something beyond our ability to manage it. Now, here's the catch. Okay, take two individuals. They're both going to be doing the same thing, living in different parts of the country. What they're going to do is this person is planning, it's a beautiful Sunday. They're planning on going to the beach. They have all their friends planning on coming over, people they haven't seen for a long time. Okay, they're getting ready. They pack their picnic and things like that, and they're getting ready to go to the beach. Second person, another coast, doing the same thing, getting ready to go to the beach, getting ready. Their friends are coming over, okay? For both situations, what happens on that day, same setup. Both planning on doing the same thing. The sky's open, huge rainstorm, cloudy, miserable, lightning, thunder. The beach day has to be canceled. Same external stressor happened to both people. Are they both going to react the same way? Probably not. One person might be so upset, start crying, saying, I've been planning this for weeks and weeks, and I just can't believe this. This always happens to me. Why does this always happen to me, that I plan an activity and it always backfires on me? No, this is just my luck. Okay. They cry, they go to bed, they sleep for the rest of the day with a carton of ice cream. Okay, fine. The second person, same rainy day, their reaction is, that's great. Okay, we'll reschedule. And now I have a whole day to clean my closets, get to those drawers I haven't looked through. Great. This is a day that I've been waiting to have. That is an example of how we perceive, how the way in which we perceive our stressors and what we tell ourselves about our stressors is then what triggers our physiologic reaction that we call stress. Does that make sense to you?
Makes a lot of sense.
And there's so much to that. I mean, that's, there's how do we change our thinking? Do we look at a situation? Do we notice? How do we know? You talk about mindfulness. Part of mindfulness is noticing how we are feeling. And if we notice internally how we're feeling and notice like, wow, I'm like kind of wound up here. Huh? What's that about? Is there something in my world right now that I am perceiving as a threat to me?
Yeah, I wanted to say, if I can interrupt you, because there's, like you said, there's two different responses that would have happened, and it's actually happening probably every single day, millions of times across the world. There are some habitual responses though. Like if you one's willingness to change your thinking and your habitual thinking is probably the key here. I can only tell from my perspective because I was the first example for most of my life. I kind of grew up in that environment. I saw a lot of relatives like, responding and still responding to that to the situation in the same way as the first person that was panicking, that was blaming on everything and was so dissatisfied. But at one point in my life, I realized that I don't want to live like that, and that's not something I want to entertain any longer. So I began the process of essentially influencing those habitual and rewiring those habitual thoughts that popped out, or habitual not only thoughts, habitual emotions that were triggered by some thoughts and my response to the stressors. So that's something that I believe is important to first of all be aware of that, and I'm curious to hear your take on that. To be aware of that, and second of all, to put in the work to influence it and change it, rewire it.
Well, and that's interesting because do you know that, there's a lot of science behind what we're talking about. That the reality is that 85% of people's thoughts are negative thoughts. It's
Wow.
kind of a remarkable number. But you talked about some of the automatic things and the ways in which people behave habitually. Then we're getting to the question of what motivates somebody to want to change or to get healthier. And what does it mean if somebody really is struggling? Okay. And that's where, there are people that are sick with an illness called depression or anxiety. And for those people, that is like heart disease or diabetes. It's a medical illness, a mental illness like anxiety or depression or schizophrenia. And people need to understand that in our world right now, we talk about recovery, and we also talk about recovery when we're dealing with things like mental illness. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you are no longer a person that has that illness. It just means that you have learned to more effectively recognize the symptoms, the flare-ups, and develop your own ways of coping. Sometimes might include medication, sometimes might include meditation, sometimes might include a variety of things. Okay. And there's again, you can see that so much of this is about our seeing ourselves, but it's also about seeing other people. This thing I was telling you about offline before we got on called mental health first aid, that I'm really proud of. And if you have not taken a mental health first aid course, you yourself, I encourage you to take it. 8 million people in the world, 4 million in the United States have taken mental health first aid. It's an 8-hour course to train ordinary people how to recognize, understand mental illness, mental health, substance use disorder, and how to recognize if somebody is experiencing a potential mental health or substance use crisis. And it teaches ordinary citizens, not medical people, not mental health people, a 5-step response of how to approach somebody and to not to become a mental health provider, but how as a human to not walk away from that person in fear, but to say, hey, are you okay? To learn that when you ask somebody, are you thinking of hurting yourself? You're not going to make them suicidal. To learn to say things like people died by suicide, not committed suicide, to understand. And this course, so it's like first aid. It's like first aid and CPR. And it's come to the United States in 2008. And I actually am really proud that I wrote a small grant. It wasn't in Florida. We hadn't started it yet in South Florida. There were a couple of people instructed, but nobody was actually teaching classes. And I wrote a small grant, and eventually we built a kind of real grassroots community-wide coalition. And since 2014, we've trained over 16,000 people, mental health first aid. And they've taken, and you can become a card-carrying mental health first aider. It's like I'm telling you, it's really a remarkable.
Is it available online? Is it in person?
In person, you look it up. If you Googled in your community, I bet if you look to see where's a class that I can take in, where you live in California. Now, since COVID, they've developed hybrid courses. So, and number one, to answer your question, you can take it online, but it's a wonderful interactive class too. And so that's one piece. That's something I'm really proud of people knowing about. And the other thing is our work with, the language of disabilities over the years, Matt. I'm rambling a little bit, but not really. It's really understanding that we have a world that are filled with people that have all different ways in which they're trying to manage, and we have to understand that people that are struggling. There are some people, that we have a supported apartment program for adults with disabilities, but we recognize that a mental illness can sometimes be a lifelong disability, and somebody may need that kind of support and structure. It's all about with human beings. There's all those ways of intervening. There's, meditation and coping and mindfulness and therapy and group therapy and trauma therapy and all those kinds of things, right? And at the end of the day, we're all moving toward health. And that's what I like to think, that there's a natural progression that we all want. Wherever we are, it's a next step forward. And whatever gains we made, they're ours to keep along the way. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but
A lot of things most of the things you say made sense to me, but I need to allow it to be absorbed by my brain, because those are so important topics, and it's essentially like I feel like it's a journey through my last 3 decades on this planet, and you've been working in the field for the last 3 decades, so I'm absorbing as much as I can because it's very impactful.
I'm really glad, and I'm honored to have the time to just talk to somebody who wants to our challenges as human beings on this planet to manage and cope. And because there's so many elements of that, so many elements of that. We all come with different genealogy. We all come with different backgrounds. We all come with different precursors. We learn good habits. We learn bad habits. We all have different parents. We all, have opportunities to rewire, as you said. I like that you used that word, because I wouldn't still be doing this if I didn't believe that there was always an opportunity to tweak and improve.
When I first encountered the term neuroplasticity, I decided to believe in it and a way that you can rewire. It had to start with a belief, otherwise I would be wasting my own time by even trying to rewire and reshape how I think, and then impact my the automatic thoughts. So that had to start somewhere, and it's just a topic I'm really interested in, how our brains work, especially when it comes to like mental health. And I still have a bunch of books that I haven't gone through in my home library that I look forward to going through in the near future. But a conversation with an expert is it's like reading a few books at once.
I'm going to tell you something else, which is that one of the things that we have the ability to do as human beings is to be the ones to talk to ourselves about. And when I was in graduate school, the work that I did, my research on, was something in the old days they called self-instruction, which was a precursor to cognitive therapy. The idea of it is that if we kind of get, as you said before, can kind of take a pause to look for a minute at what's happening with us and to build in a statement to tell ourselves, hey, I'm okay in this room. Hey, yeah, I'm scared, but I can do this. It's the when raising your children, it's two things can be true. It's your kid is really scared and I don't want to go to school today. And mommy, I don't want you to go to work, and don't leave me, don't leave me, don't leave me. And I'm not leaving and I don't want to and it's two things can be true for all of us, meaning I can be really angry and sad and miserable about something happening in the world. And I can be, crying and this and whatever, but that can be true. And I still have a job I need to do, so sometimes it's a whole other conversation is about parenting, but sometimes, we're raising the most anxious generation of kids we've ever had, ever. That should be another podcast. And I'm sorry to tell you, but we're raising kids that are scared. You know why? Because we're not teaching them that both things can be true. We're trying to make their scary and sad emotions go away and make them feel better. And the job of a parent is not to make your kid feel better. The job of a parent is to make your kid have a safe place in which they can feel, And that's true for us as adults too. That's why I love developmental psychology. How great would it be if somebody let you feel and didn't just want to rush to make you feel better?
Create an environment for them to feel. That's an important one. Well, coming from Eastern Europe, I was kind of left alone to feel, instead of having a more of a safe environment, and maybe has some good to it, and some obviously bad, but I learned how to deal with things until it became overwhelming. That's one scary part that I can imagine with the new generations coming. It's going to be a tough place where maybe they're gonna be. I can imagine that they might be hiding in themselves so much that you will not be able to recognize if they.
Well, and Matt, here's what's interesting about that too, is that we also are the loneliest generation. And one of the biggest,
A world where we have millions of friends and followers all across.
and we're the loneliest generation.
Insane.
And that's something to really think about, is that this is the great irony of our world right now is that the technology that, like, you're living your life with and working with and your whole career, right? We're creating a world in which we have instantaneous connections with millions and millions of people. Call them what you will, call them friends, call them likes, call them followers, call them influencers, call them whatever you want, okay? The more connections we're building and the quicker access we have to other human beings, the lonelier we are becoming as a people, because COVID helped with that too, by the way. And so we have a generation that doesn't really know how to sit and connect with a human being. There's something important about not just talking to a robot.
Bot.
Right.
There is, and again, as I said earlier, the sharing genuine stories matters more than ever now.
More than ever. And we're not creating space enough for
Yeah.
people to just share their stories. So I love having this chance to talk with you.
Likewise, I love that as well. And thank you for your time. As I said many times, it's very, very helpful and impactful. Now, let's talk about Alpert JFS and your role that you've been
I would love to.
for a few years. I'm really curious because I couldn't imagine that. How does your work look like I'm not sure if this is on a day-to-day basis or a case-by-case basis, but in general.
My role's changed a lot over the years. So in the earlier days, I was basically doing a lot of therapy myself, and kind of started off that way and then grew with the organization, helped build the counseling program. And we built a large mental health program that includes social workers and psychologists and psychiatrists. And we have a whole student training program. And I supervised and helped develop that program early on. And so there's that. But our agency, and now, my role now is I'm much more involved in kind of big picture strategic oversight of a lot of elements of the organization, looking at quality, looking at, what we're going to do with AI, thinking about those kinds of things, kind of very involved with community. And I'm a connector. I'm a dot connector. So, knowing a lot of people, both local and nationally and on a statewide level, just to sort of get our message out. So I am very involved with strategy of the organization. But we have about 25 different programs, including the mental health services, but we're a large human service agency. We've been in our community more than 50 years. We were voted the nonprofit of the year in 2023. That's a big deal. It's not a little deal. And because there's like hundreds of nonprofit agencies in South Florida, because there's a lot of fundraising that happens down here. I have a big part of our agency that's our behavioral health. We have another part of our agency that is case management, where we'll go into homes of people, most of whom are older adults, and we'll kind of help somebody maintain a life of dignity in their own home. Like, can they manage their finances? Do they need home health? Those kinds of things. So this case management, we have a residential program, which is for adults with disabilities. And we get folks from around the country that come to that apartment program because it's not a time-limited treatment program. It's a residential option for folks who may always need some type of support, to function independently in their own apartment. And so we do that as well. As I told you, we teach mental health first aid. We have a mentoring program. We work with Holocaust survivors. We work with more than 200 Holocaust survivors. Florida is the second outside of Israel. There's New York, and then next is Florida in terms of number of Holocaust survivors. There's, I think, somewhere 5,000 to 10,000 Holocaust survivors. Don't quote me on that, but somewhere around that in Florida. And then our centralized intake department, that's kind of where it all begins. We don't like to just say, I am your bot answering the phone. Here is the number that you should call. Press 1, press 2. You actually speak to a human being. In fact, we have 5 master's level social workers that will speak to you on the phone. And if you call because something is not going right in your world, you may not call and say, I need this program or that program or whatever. You may not know what you need help with. So we need a good person on the phone who can do a good assessment, and during the course of a conversation with you, give you kind of help you with some next steps and not just give you a phone number to call. So you're really getting a comprehensive assessment on the phone. And we have our own home health agency also. So we're a pretty large organization. We have almost 100 employees, I think. That may be high. I'm not sure exactly the number, but it's somewhere around that. And I've just watched it grow over the years, and I've watched and am really honored to be a part of that and have done a lot of community education and speaking because, we're not the sexy agency. It's not sexy to talk about, like, hey, guess what? I went and talked to a therapist. I went and did this and I'm dealing with guardianship. And did you know my aunt is dying of this? And I'm clinically depressed and can't get out of bed. We're not always the shiny coin, but when somebody's hurting, we're the ones they turn to. So that's a little bit about who we are.
That's so beautiful about that. I'm glad that agencies like this, like Alpert JFS, and exist, and they're providing that help. And you touched on one big topic, AI. So what do you see AI where, or how do you see AI being implemented in that particular region? Because I can imagine, just to finish the question or maybe the statement, I can imagine some people will be opening up to AI more than to perhaps another human being because of what they're dealing with. Maybe that's the case. I was just my guess here. And obviously, AI being already read pretty much all the books by Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and all everyone in history, and watch all the videos on the internet and went through all this articles on the internet. Where do you see AI maybe participating in that?
I was just at a very large national conference, really the largest behavioral health conference in the country. And I spent a lot of time going to the AI seminars
Really?
because, oh yeah, that was the reason I was like signed up for every AI seminar because I was like, when am I going to be out of a job? That kind of thing. Not really. But the idea was like, where are we with it? What's happening with it in the behavioral health field? And it's kind of exploding, but not in ways that you might really think. First of all, I'm using AI a lot, but I'm using it more in terms of writing and as an assistant and as a tool to, sometimes not to give me words, but sort of it can be a really helpful assistant. If I've written a document and I say, okay, let's try to reword this now for an audience of 5th graders. Can you help me with that? Now I could do that myself, but it's a time saver for me. And then once AI will give me that back, then I'll edit it again and things like that. The thing you need to realize about AI is it's really only about what people put into it. It's really, and so it's sort of like data in, data out. Like you got to be smart to understand that to really have it be as effective as it can be, it's going to have to be what you ask of it. And to remember that it's not a human and it's going to not get things right sometimes. Okay. And it's always going to need, at this seminar I went to answer your question specifically in terms of mental health, one of the things they said, and this was just like a couple of weeks ago, and it were the leaders in the field in terms of AI in the behavioral health arena. And they said, regardless of how much we bring AI into our agencies and our mental health work, it needs to start with a human and end with a human. It was really interesting. I thought that was so powerful. And it made a lot of sense to me, and how it's starting to find its way into clinical practices is there's some AI devices now, or tool, whatever you call them, hardware or software, whatever it is, platforms. I don't know. I don't know what those all are, but that I can tell you if you're my patient that this session is going to be recorded by my AI assistant. And at the end of my session, instead of me writing clinical notes, it's going to basically give me a note summarizing our session. And, so people in the mental health field are starting to use it to expedite their documentation. But there's, it's new enough that there's concerns about that. There's concerns, who's keeping that recording? Is it in the cloud? Is it disappearing? Which there's some AI companies that, are newer and aren't it's just very new, and you have to be very concerned in terms of HIPAA and data. Do I think it's ever going to replace the kind of conversation that we might be having? No. But I think it's going to be a tool to a certain point. I'm going to tell you a little secret. I tried it myself. Somebody told me that there was they called me, they said, Dr. Rotenberg, you ought to try this and have all your therapists do this. I don't want to say what the product is, but it's a particular product that if I'm somebody that's in distress, I can just start talking to them. Okay. And I signed on and I sort of pretended that I was that person. And I did it. I don't think I did it verbally. I think I wrote to the bot and I said, I'm having a really rough time. I made up a clinical story. This was happening. I didn't want to just pretend right away. I just didn't want to go in and say, I'm thinking of killing myself, because I would have thought they would have known I was playing with the system, because I'm sure everybody tests these systems. But I went into it gradually, having a rough day, and it gave me some nice information that I could have gotten from Wikipedia. Okay. It said back to me, some of the signs and symptoms of depression. It gave me some of the things that I might have learned in a class. Okay. But then I escalated it a little bit. And I said, I'm really not sleeping at all. And now sometimes at night I have bad thoughts. And when I have these bad thoughts, I think of, and I gave some horrible scenario about what I was thinking about doing. And the next response I got was, this is beyond what I'm able to manage. It's time you talk to a human being or something like that. And so, we just have to, we have to not be scared of it, because we're all using AI now, whether we like it or not. Everyone is using AI, even without being asked if they want to. You get a phone call. How many times I get phone calls all the time that now because I've gotten a little savvy, I used to think they were people, right? And I get a phone call, hello, Elaine. And I'll say, hello. And they say, I'm calling from, and I'll say, wait a minute now, because I can hear, you can hear it, right? And I said, no, you're not a human, you're a robot, and I don't wish to speak to you. Thank you. That's become my new response. So we got to wait till we worry, but I do think it's a useful tool.
I agree with you. And few actually, I had some comments as you were talking about it, and you mentioned them actually, because I feel like AI becomes the next search engine. So if this is a case where someone will open up in front of AI and essentially give them the personal information and how they feel and all of that, and there's a certain point where you might change. You've mentioned previously self-instructions. So it can help you rewrite your self-instruction that you should change about your self-view. That one point. But if it escalates further as a search engine, it should be able in a nice way guide you towards institutions like yours, for example, where that can be very helpful. I can imagine outsourcing simple tasks to read through transcripts or be part of conversation where you will get the notes and the highlights and teach it, if you teach it correctly, what to pay attention to more than anything else, and then writing a report on it. That can be very useful. I believe AI can help with that. And there's something else. You mentioned devices or products and physical products and devices. I don't use it that often, but sometimes I do. I have this device that you put on your head and it measures your brain waves. So if you are into meditation,
You've been holding out on me.
it's been pretty detailed, I have to say, and pretty accurate. That's the word I wanted to say. Detailed and accurate, because it measures it to the second, and accurate because it's actually very accurate. I tested it, not test. I don't want to say tested it. It's not like a clinical studies I'm doing here, but I shared it with some family members to see if that's just me, that the way you do it. Essentially, if you can call it meditation, breath work, however you want to call it, mindfulness moments. But when you sit down and you can turn this device on and it connects to your app, it will read your brain waves. And there is a moment where after 5 or 10 minutes, when you're into it, when you start finally focus on your breath work or how your body feels or being present, it shows you the exact moment that it was on that graph when you finished. And like I said, I shared with some family members, and there's literally maybe 3 seconds out of 15 minutes or 10 minutes if I got them to sit down for 10 or 15 minutes.
I actually know the app that you're talking about. I forgot the name of it, but
the one that I'm using is called Muse.
Yeah, there's another one, and it is very interesting. You can see now. Here's the only caution I say: all that stuff is great. It's great meditation, mindfulness, all that stuff. When do we know that we need to ask for help? And I guess I want to make sure that we don't miss that point as well, which is when we recognize that we're not functioning in some of the significant areas in our life for a considerable period of time. It's time to say, not, I mean, everybody's going to have a bad day. Everybody's going to get scared. Everybody's going to want to pull the covers over their head. But when we recognize in ourselves that there's a serious interruption in our relationships with our friends, our family, our job, ourself, when we really are struggling to function on a day-to-day, our eating, our sleeping, our all those kinds of things, our withdrawing and stuff, that's the point to say, uh-oh, maybe I need to reach out to somebody. And we need to make sure that's part of the conversation as well, and that it's okay. It's okay to be not okay.
Very important message. And I'm glad we highlighted that towards the end of it. And I know we could talk for another 2 days or 3 days.
And, there's a lot of things that people hopefully will take away from this. One is concrete, take a mental health first aid class. Two is look up www or alpertjfs.org and check us out because we're a remarkable agency. Three is if you've got a loved one with special needs or disability and you're thinking about residential options, take a look at our program because it's unique in the country. If you want to talk about stress, give me a call. And honor your own boat and that of your friends.
Love it. What a powerful message right there.
We talk again, Matt.
Absolutely. I look forward to that already. Enjoy your weekend.
To Happy Father's Day.
That's right. My first.
Is this your first Father's Day? Wow. Enjoy it. Be present. Pour love and self-esteem into your kid.
I'll do my best to do that. Thank you so much.
All right. Be in touch with you soon.
Bye-bye.